Hey besties, it's Sarah. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a part 2 of a video I did recently. I did this concept where I talked about the worst books I've ever read according to Goodreads, and so today we're going to be doing the inverse. I'm going to be doing the best books I've ever read according to Goodreads. And so the way this works is that I went on Goodreads and I sorted all the books I read by rating, and so I was looking at the highest rated and then went down from there. And so we'll be discussing the top 15 counting down to number 1, and so the number 1 book will be the highest rated book that I've read. And we're just going to talk about if I agree with these ratings, disagree, where do I lie on the sort of rating scale, and we'll just see what Goodreads has to say. I'm kind of curious, and so yeah, let's just get into it. So in the number 15 slot, we have In the Dreamhouse by Carmen Maria Machado. This honestly didn't surprise me because when I was getting this list together, I noticed that there were a lot of sort of memoir nonfiction books on it, and I feel like those are the types of books that random people are going to pick up at the bookstore who maybe don't read a lot of fiction. I think a lot of people enjoy reading memoirs. I'm not a huge memoir reader, but there are a couple on this list, and so I really like this. I give it 4 stars. The Goodreads rating is a 4.46, and so I would say that I pretty much agree, and I thought it was very poetically written. It definitely is written from someone who went to school for writing. You can tell that. That is one critique that I've seen other people make. I really enjoyed her writing style, and I really liked all the parallels she made between a dream house and this abusive relationship that she had, because a lot of the story is about her going through grad school and dating this other woman who was a bit problematic, and they had a very tumultuous relationship. And so it kind of explores the dynamic and the power dynamic, especially when someone isn't being physically abused and they're just being mentally abused, and also how that plays out in lesbian relationships. So I enjoyed it, and I kind of get why it's on this list. In number 14, we have Educated by Tara Westover. The Goodreads rating is a 4.47, and I personally gave it a 4. I actually had forgotten that I read this, but this was pretty big the year that it came out. It is another memoir. Tara Westover is from a very religious, conservative family. I can't remember exactly where they're from, but she was homeschooled growing up, and her parents didn't believe in education for their children. So the whole book is about how she sort of had to teach herself math and all these things, and she went on to go to Brigham Young University and then eventually I think Oxford, and so it's all about her story of just trying to better herself and how her family didn't really support her when she was trying to learn things. I remember enjoying this. I read it for a real life book club that I was a part of, and we had a lot to discuss during the book club. I think it's one of those books that gives you a lot to kind of talk about and think about. But I remember my one critique of this was that there was a lot of vague stuff in it, like a lot about Tara's siblings and how she got into school and like how she paid for things was very vague. Obviously I think the story is true, but she kind of breezed over a lot of details that I thought would have been really interesting to explore, because I was very curious about how she was able to go to really expensive universities with no money, and also how she was able to teach herself like math and stuff. I don't fully remember all the details, but it is a really fascinating story, so I totally get why this is on this list. Also, Tara Westover did like a lot of interviews and press, like she was on like Good Morning America, all those different things that a lot of authors whose books are doing well among like people just in the wild tend to do. So that makes sense to me that this is pretty popular and rated pretty highly, because I do think a lot of just random people read it, so it makes sense. In the number 13 spot, we have Ignite Me by Taha Mafi. I was a little surprised to see this here. This has a 4.47 rating, and I personally rated it 2 stars. I actually had to go back and watch the review I did about this in like 2016 to remember why I gave it 2 stars. I know that I'm not a huge fan of the Shatter Me series just from memory, but I couldn't really remember why. This is the 3rd book in the series. It's a dystopian series about like these people that have powers. If you've never read it before, it's quite popular, so you probably have, especially in your YA heyday. But I think I didn't like this because of the relationship between Warner and Juliet. When I was watching my review, I had a lot of issues with the pacing of the relationship. To be honest, I read this like way back in 2016, and it was like early 2016, like I think like end of 2015, so I don't really have a lot of stuff to say. And also my review of this trilogy is no longer online. I took it offline like a while ago, so you can't really find it, but I went into my archives and I watched it, and yeah, I don't know, I just didn't really like it. And I guess it makes sense to me that it's on the list, but I don't personally agree. I think that the Shatter Me trilogy is very overwritten, and the writing style is a bit like too purple prose-y for me. Coming in at number 12, we have House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas, and this is one that I do agree with. It has a 4.48 rating on Goodreads, and I personally gave it 5 stars. I loved this book so much. This is the first book in the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas, and this first one is a slay. It's about our main character Bryce, and she is mourning the death of her best friend, and a few years later she is tasked with trying to figure out what happened to her, and her partner is this angel who is sort of like a fallen angel cop character, and so they have to do some detective work to kind of find out what's going on in the city. And so it's just a really good urban fantasy series, and I really enjoyed this one, and so I think it makes sense that it's 5 stars. Also, Sara I is richer than God, and everyone loves her books, so it kind of makes sense to me that she would show up on this list. In the number 11 spot, we have The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This also has a 4.48 rating, and I believe I gave it 4 stars when I read it. I read it when it first came out, back when I used to read a lot of young adult, and I think I stand by this. This book was pretty revolutionary, especially when it came out. I don't feel like there were a lot of books discussing these sorts of issues like police brutality, and I also think that the movie that came out was also very good. And so yeah, I stand by this one. I think when I read it, I didn't love the writing style, but I think the story itself is like super powerful, so I completely agree with this one. Like, it makes sense that a lot of people have read it and rated it really highly. It's not my favorite book of all time, but I did enjoy it, and I enjoyed the movie when it came out, so don't have a lot to say about this one. So at number 10, we have Death Note Volume 1. This is a bind up of the first 2 mangas in the series. I read this so long ago. I read it when I used to have a book club called the Lonely Genres Book Club with Anais, who is no longer a booktuber. If you remember her, RIP, she was the best. But we had a book club together and we read this, and I don't think I was a huge fan of it. The Goodreads rating for it is a 4.48, and I personally gave it 3 stars. I went back and read my review, and I think I said something along the lines of I hadn't read a manga in a long time, and so I wasn't really enjoying the format, and that some of the story was like a little bit slow to me, I think. I never finished this. I never read more of the manga series, so you'll have to let me know if I should continue or if I should watch the anime or something. I definitely would be open to watching the anime, but yeah, I don't have a lot of thoughts on this because I read it literally in like I think 2016 or 2017, so some of the books on this list are like really old, and I'm really having to go into the recesses of my mind to remember why I rated them the way that I did. Coming in at number 9, we have Wondersmith by Jessica Townsend. This is the sequel to Nevermore. I was actually kind of shocked to see this on this list, not because I don't love the Nevermore series, but because I didn't think it was that popular to have such a high rating. But the Goodreads rating for it is 4.49, and I personally gave it 5 stars. This is, like I mentioned, the sequel to the first book, Nevermore, and it is a series about our main character, Morrigan Crow, and she is a cursed child, meaning that she was born on this really evil day called Eventide. And so she has always been told that when she turns, I think like 10 or 11, and so on her birthday, this man named Juniper shows up and he whisks her away to the world of Nevermore, and she has to compete in these trials, and Wondersmith is the follow-up to the first book, so it's all about what happens to her after she does those trials. And I love this middle grade series. It is so sweet, it's so darling, it's just so much fun. And so I really appreciate that it is one of the highest rated books on this list, and I super agree. I had a great time reading it, and I cannot wait for the 4th book to come out, even though it keeps getting postponed, and I literally want to die every time that I hear that Jessica Townsend has pushed the release date. At number 8, we have I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I'm also not very surprised by seeing this book. Like I mentioned, there's quite a few memoirs that show up on this list, and obviously I'm Glad My Mom Died is one of the most popular ones that I've been hearing of in recent times. It has a 4.49 Goodreads rating, and I personally gave it 4 stars. The reason that I gave it 4 stars is that although I did enjoy reading it, it just didn't really stick with me as far as a memoir that really like got under my skin. Like, I really liked it and I enjoyed Jeanette McCurdy's writing style. I would prefer to try reading some fiction from her. I know she mentioned in some interviews that she wants to eventually write some books, so I would be curious to read more from her. But if you're not familiar with who Jeanette McCurdy is, she was a star on the show iCarly on Nickelodeon, and so this book is all about how she grew up as a childhood actor and how her mom kind of abused her like stage mom role in her life, and it kind of covers her eating disorders that she experienced and just different things she went through when she was on Nickelodeon. And so it's a very harrowing book. It's very sad at times, but it was really well written, and I really enjoyed the way that Jeanette McCurdy decided to tell her life story. It was really good, but again, it wasn't my favorite book in the world, so I think that's why I gave it 4 stars. The number 7 spot is one that was so shocking to me. I was floored that this was so high on this list, but that is The Wrong Heart by Jennifer Hartman. This has a 4.5 average rating on Goodreads, and I personally gave it 1 star. Like, shockingly bad, shockingly bad. This is about a woman whose husband dies in a car accident, and then he gives his heart to another person, and so she starts talking to this person through emails because they have her husband's heart. And then meanwhile, she's also going to a support group for people who have tried to unalive themselves because she's been really going through it, and she meets a man at this support group as well, and so she starts a relationship with him, and so it's her like talking to these people, and different stuff happens. And I really hated this book. The male love interest in this was truly one of the worst that I've ever experienced in my life, and I don't understand how anyone gave this a high rating. I really enjoyed other books that I've read by Jennifer Hartman, but this one was a complete miss for me. I have a whole rant about it in a video. While we're talking about it, I do want to share that I got a hate comment on my Goodreads review from it that like kind of was like weirdly shocking and strange. So basically in my review, I just said that I didn't love the love interest, and that I thought he was like really immature, and that I just really didn't understand the love story and why Melody, the main character, would put up with this man because he was like really disturbingly gross to me. And this person commented, I honestly, truly, without hostility, want to know if you've ever been through any real trauma. If so, more power to you, and that's your opinion. Obviously, this person gave it 5 stars, and they were very angry that I rated it lowly, but I thought this was a really weird and wild thing to ask someone. Like, if I haven't been through any personal trauma, that I'm not allowed to rate a book about trauma, which also that's just literally not true. I feel like I have been through trauma. So my response was, hi blank, yes I have, thanks for checking in. Do you make it a habit of asking people about their trauma on all reviews that don't agree with your opinions? Just asking, honestly, truly, without hostility. I obviously had to have a sassy clapback moment because I just thought it was so wild that this person asked me that. They obviously never responded to me, so I think that they learned their lesson, and that was like a weird thing to say. I also feel like my review was pretty thoughtful. I didn't just go, oh my god, I hate it, this is the worst, I can't believe anyone likes this. I actually went into detail about what I didn't like about the book, so I don't know. It was a weird experience that I had on Goodreads. Number 6 goes to Jessica Townsend again with Hollowpox. This is the 3rd book in the Nevermore series, and so I was kind of surprised to see this again, especially because when I think about the books, I don't even know if Hollowpox is my favorite in the series, but I did enjoy it. It has a 4.5 rating, and I gave it 5 stars. I like all 3. I gave all 3 5 stars, but I think maybe the 1st or 2nd book is my favorite. So again, I was kind of shocked to see this so high up on the list. I didn't know there were so many Nevermore stands out there, but I'm glad that we are here and that we exist, because Nevermore is such a great series. If you haven't read it and you like middle grade, you like cozy fantasy, you absolutely should pick it up. At number 5, we have Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the 3rd book in the David Bod trilogy, which I actually absolutely love this series, so I was actually kind of excited to see this in this top list. It has a 4.5 rating, and I personally gave it 4 stars. I love this series so much. I don't talk about it on my channel a ton because I read it when I was kind of on my YouTube break in 2021, and so when I came back in 2022, I did put it on my favorites list, but I obviously haven't talked about it much since then, and I don't own any copies of the book, so you might not even know that I like this series. The David Bod trilogy is about a girl named Nari, and it takes place in a magical Middle Eastern setting. And so Nari is a pickpocket. She spends her days like cheating people of money and whatnot to survive on the streets, and at the very start of the book she's attacked by a demon, and then she gets rescued by this guy who is a djinn, and so then he takes her to the world of David Bod, which is where all the djinns live, and it's a really fascinating high fantasy series. I feel like the magic system is very unique. I haven't really read a lot of books where the main magical system is djinn, and so I really enjoyed it so much, and so I'm really happy to see this on this list. I really feel like more people should talk about the David Bod trilogy. I know that it is popular and that people have read it, but I don't feel like people hype it enough, especially on BookTube. So this is your sign to read it if you've been thinking about reading it. I will say all 3 books are pretty long, but I actually binged all 3 of them in 2 weeks, so I feel like that's saying something about how addicting they are. I really love the politics and how the magic system works. Like, everything about it was really good, and I also really enjoyed the romance. Like, it was just a good time. And I definitely think it's one of those series that would be really good if you're trying to move on from young adult and get into adult, because it is technically adult, but it has just sort of an approachable feeling the way that young adult fantasy does, but it is like a little bit better than young adult fantasy in my opinion. So I would highly recommend it. In the number 4 slot, we have House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. This actually did surprise me because I feel like House of Sky and Breath is a lot less well liked than the 1st book, and so I was kind of surprised that this would be higher on the list. Maybe it's because it came out more recently, so less people have read it, but it has a 4.51 rating, and I personally gave it 3.5 stars. If you've seen my vlog where I read this, you'll know this, but I really did not like the ending. The first, I want to say like 3/4 of this book was like 5-star reading experience for me, and then the ending really killed it for me. All the characters end up in a sort of separated situation, which I usually hate when they do that in a series where there's a wide cast of characters And there's also some people, some characters that show up at the end that I didn't enjoy. If you've read it, you'll know what I'm talking about, but it was not my vibe. I was a little bit upset with the way that Sara I decided to end this, and I'm kind of not looking forward to reading the third book in the series. Like, I will pick it up just because I've already, you know, committed to this journey with Crescent City, but I think it's unlikely that I'll like it based on the characters that showed up. And if you know, you know, and you'll know what I'm talking about. We're now to the final top 3, the highest rated books that I have read. And that is at number 3, The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This did not surprise me because this is the kind of book that a bunch of white ladies would pick for their book club. I actually read it because of my book club that I was in IRL, the one that I also read Educated by Tara Westover for. The funny thing is I read the book and then I didn't even go to the meeting where they talked about the book. And then after that, I never participated in that book club again. And this one, I will say, it was not a white lady book club. It was quite a diverse Atlanta book club called Booked and Busy. And it was really fun, actually. But yeah, I didn't really participate after that because life got busy. And I just feel like people would read this. It's kind of a book that like Reese Witherspoon would put on her like approved books or like Oprah or something. So it totally makes sense to me that so many people have read it. Also, people eat up Holocaust / World War II books, so that also makes sense. The Nightingale follows 2 sisters that are originally, I believe, from Paris, and so it is their different paths that they take during World War II. And so one of them becomes a spy and the other one lives in the countryside with her daughter, and they have to take in a Nazi soldier to live with them. This book has a 4.61 rating on Goodreads, and I personally gave it 4 stars. I think ultimately I agree with this. It was good. It was a good time. It was kind of long for me. I don't really love historical fiction all the time, and so I think there were points where I got a little bit bored, which is why I gave it 4 stars. Also, I didn't like some of the stuff that ended up happening with the characters. And the number 2 slot is a book that I don't think will surprise anyone, and that is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I personally agree with this. It has a 4.67 rating on Goodreads, and I gave it 5 stars, and I absolutely loved it. If you've been watching my channel this year, you'll know that I am a Fourth Wing girly. I know that a lot of people have been coming out with rant reviews about it recently, and while I respect all of my fellow booktubers' opinions, I personally loved it. I thought it was great. It's about this girl named Violet who goes to a dragon riding school, and a lot of stuff happens in it, and the dragons are the best. I loved the world building. I've seen a lot of critiques about the writing and the world building and the this and the that, and I couldn't disagree more. I really loved Fourth Wing. I thought it was so much fun. It reminded me a lot of like Hunger Games or Divergent mixed with like a CW show like The 100 or The Vampire Diaries, and it was just like the perfect mix of entertaining for me. And I truly feel like that book had crack cocaine in it because it was so addicting. And even though I will admit like some of the dialogue is a little bit cringy and the romance is kind of cheesy, I just loved it. I don't care about any of that. It's one of those books where I'm like, I know there's probably valid things to critique, but I personally, for my own mental health, will not be taking any of that on board. Like when my fellow booktube friends posted these rant reviews, I was like, I would be clicking on that. And then in their reading wrap-ups, when they would like start to talk about it, I would just skip forward and be like, what are you talking about? I don't see that part of the video. I don't think they've ever read Fourth Wing. Also, this is not an invitation on my comments to tell me all the reasons you don't like Fourth Wing, because every time that I talk about Fourth Wing, someone in the comments wants to go on and on about what they didn't like about it and like write me an essay, and I'm so sorry. I'm not here for that, and I won't be reading that. If you want to send me a bunch of paragraphs, that's totally cool. Well, it's not cool, but I won't be reading it, so you'll just be speaking to the air or someone else in the comments, because it won't be me. Finally, the number 1 slot is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is following that trend that I was saying where I feel like a lot of people enjoy reading memoirs. This has a 4.71 rating, and I personally gave it 4 stars. I think you'll notice that I don't tend to give memoirs higher than 4 stars because they're just not really my preferred type of book. Like, I enjoy them and I think that they're interesting, but I typically don't end up like keeping them in my mind much after I read them. This one was pretty powerful because it's by Chanel Miller, who was the survivor of the Stanford assault case. Basically, a guy sexually assaulted her after a party, and so she went to press charges against him, and it was this huge court case, and her identity was actually hidden from the public for a really long time until she wrote this book. And so I found this book to be really powerful as she was kind of describing what it's like to go through a case where you're accusing someone of rape. It was a really tough read, and it definitely was harrowing at times, and I really enjoyed Chanel Miller's writing style. Similar to Jeanette McCurdy, I would definitely love to read more from her. Like if she ever wrote fiction in the future, or even if she wrote another memoir, I would definitely pick it up. But I really enjoyed this. It just wasn't my favorite book of all time, which is why I think I gave it 4 stars. I always feel a little weird rating memoirs, but I rate everything that I read, so I still will do it based on my enjoyment. But obviously this is not any sort of critique on her life story or any of the people that I gave 4 stars on their memoir. But yeah, I don't really know a time that I've ever given a memoir 5 stars. If you know of any good memoirs, let me know down below. But that brings us to the end of this list. These are the top 15 books I've ever read according to Goodreads. I agreed with Goodreads for the most part, but there's definitely a few in there where I'm like, why is that there? If you've made it to the end of this video and you enjoyed it, feel free to use the sparkle heart emoji, you know, the little pink one with the sparkles on it. And I'll just know that you made it to the end. It'll be a cute little moment between us. And if you're interested, my Patreon is linked down below, where I do a lot of exclusive content, reading sprints, there's a Discord, there's a book club. It's just a whole cute little bookish community, and you can totally check that out if you want. And I thank you all so much for watching. You're all beautiful. Have a nice day.